They all came here to listen to about education solving the future. I think it's all really important always to remember the victims and who are the victims in all this.
They smiled for the cameras. They stood side by side under chandeliers dripping with history. They waved from gilded balconies and shook hands at garden parties with the practiced grace of people who have done it 1,000 times. From the outside, the British royal family looked like it always does, polished, united, untouchable. But something is happening behind those palace gates that no press release will ever confirm. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. A brooch worn as a weapon, a seat quietly denied. A man who spent 60 years being underestimated, finally making a move so calculated, so precise, so perfectly timed that the royal world is still trying to catch up. Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, the quiet one, the loyal one, the one every tabloid forgot about for 3 decades, may have just executed the most powerful play in the Windsor family in a generation. And Camilla, the woman who fought her entire adult life to sit on that throne, she never saw it coming. Stay with me, because this story goes all the way to the crown. And it starts, as so many royal power shifts do, not with a declaration, but with a silence. The quiet prince, who is finally speaking through his actions. Let's establish something important before we go any further. For most of his life, Prince Edward has been the royal the tabloids seem to forget, while Prince Andrew made headlines with scandals that shook the institution to its foundations, while Prince Harry packed up his family and fled to California with a tell-all memoir in his pocket, while King Charles spent decades navigating his complicated path to the throne, Edward just showed up, quietly, dutifully, year after year after year. No bombshells, no scandals, no dramatic interviews on American television. Just a man in a well-cut suit, attending the engagements, giving the speeches, cutting the ribbons, and going home. The press barely covered him. The public barely noticed him. Even within royal circles, he was often referred to, sometimes with affection, sometimes with mild condescension, as the spare, the youngest child of the late Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, 15th in the line of succession, not a threat to anyone, not a player on any chessboard. That perception was always a mistake, and between 2025 and 2026, the evidence of just how significant a mistake it was has been quietly, relentlessly mounting. Here is what the mainstream media has consistently underreported. The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh undertook multiple solo overseas trips in 2025, high-profile diplomatic missions that demonstrated loyalty to King Charles at a moment when that loyalty was genuinely needed and not merely ceremonial. They traveled to Papua New Guinea to commemorate that country's 50th anniversary of independence. They traveled to Japan together. They represented the crown at moments when the crown needed reliable, scandal-free representation, and they delivered. Think about that for a moment. While other royals were navigating crises, facing legal challenges, or rehabilitating public images, Edward and his wife Sophie were doing the actual work of the monarchy, quietly, competently, without complaint. And the public noticed, even if the palace press office didn't initially reward them for it. Polling data from YouGov tells a story that should have alarm bells ringing in certain palace corridors. Approximately 50 to 51% of Britons hold positive opinions of Prince Edward and Sophie, with only 19 and 12% respectively holding negative views. Those are remarkable numbers, numbers that most senior royals would envy. Now compare that to Queen Camilla. Her favorability has dropped to just 42%, the lowest figure recorded by YouGov since March 2021. And the proportion of Britons who hold an unfavorable view of her? It has risen 4 points, now sitting at 45%. Let that sink in. More people in Britain currently dislike Queen Camilla than like her. Meanwhile, the man the press forgot about for 30 years has a net favorability rating significantly higher than the Queen of England. So when Edward begins making subtle moves, rearranging schedules, showing up at events without Camilla's allies nearby, positioning himself and Sophie in proximity to William's circle rather than Camilla's, people inside the palace are absolutely paying attention. The question is, are you? The brooch that changed everything, royal jewelry as warfare. Here is something that non-royal watchers often miss entirely. and it is crucial to understanding what is happening right now. In the world of the British monarchy, nothing happens by accident. Not a wave, not a glance, not a seating arrangement at a state dinner, and absolutely, categorically, not a brooch. Jewelry expert Justin Daughters, managing director at Berganza, has explained this with a precision that is worth understanding fully. Brooches, he points out, are the most controlled form of royal jewelry. They are never decorative accidents. They are signals. Unlike necklaces or earrings, which frame beauty, brooches frame intention. Positioned close to the heart, they carry symbolic weight, loyalty, remembrance, power, defiance, duty. So when Camilla began selecting specific brooches at specific moments during a particularly turbulent period in palace politics, royal watchers took notice immediately. The brooch in question, which Camilla first debuted in early 2023, remains officially unexplained. Its origins have never been formally confirmed by the palace, but it is widely believed to have been a gift from King Charles in the lead-up to their coronation. What made it remarkable was not its monetary value or its craftsmanship, but its symbolism. In February 2023, Camilla appeared wearing a brooch shaped like the Tudor crown, a silver piece adorned with sapphires, rubies, and emeralds, the colors of royalty, the colors of authority, the colors of a lineage stretching back centuries. The Tudor crown is not merely decorative. It is the symbol that represents King Charles III's royal cipher. The last time it appeared prominently on royal insignia was during the reign of King George VI, Charles's own grandfather. By wearing that brooch, Camilla was making a statement that required no words. She was displaying the king's authority pinned literally to her chest. She was saying, in the language of the palace that predates democracy and press releases by centuries, "I am here, I am legitimate, and I have the king's seal of approval." It was a bold move, a powerful move, the kind of move you make when you feel the ground shifting beneath you and need to remind the room of where you stand. But here is what makes Edward's response so fascinating and so much more sophisticated. He didn't compete with jewelry. He and Sophie didn't commission their own symbolic pieces to counter Camilla's Tudor crown. They didn't make public statements or call journalists to offer anonymous palace sources, suggesting all was not well. They did something far more powerful in royal terms. They showed up where Camilla was not. They took on engagements that she was expected to lead. They stepped in at moments when the palace PR machine required a friendly, dependable Windsor face, and Camilla's network was either unavailable or increasingly politically inconvenient. They let their presence carry the message, and their presence, delivered with restraint and impeccable timing, is currently the loudest statement being made anywhere inside the House of Windsor. As Daughters himself notes, the most effective royal jewelry asks to be noticed second, not first. It doesn't interrupt the moment, it supports it. That restraint is a very deliberate royal instinct. Edward and Sophie's restraint is their own version of the brooch, and right now, in the unspoken language of the palace, it is speaking volumes. William's coronation, and who isn't in the room. Now we arrive at the question that is, quietly, guiding every decision being made inside Buckingham Palace right now. William is coming, not tomorrow, not next year necessarily. But the inevitability of King William V is no longer a distant theory. It is the operating assumption behind every alliance being formed, every favor being called in, every appointment being made, and every absence being noted. The future king casts a long shadow, and everyone in that shadow is already deciding which side of him they want to be on. The critical question, the one every senior royal is answering through their actions, their appearances, and their strategic absences, is this: whose coronation will this be? Because William's coronation will not just be a ceremony, it will be a declaration, a reshuffling of the royal deck, a new arrangement of power that will define the monarchy for a generation. And the people in the front rows on that day will be the people who spent the years leading up to it, making the right moves, forging the right alliances, and, crucially, maintaining their distance from declining favorability ratings. The most closely watched royal gathering at Easter 2026 was Catherine, Princess of Wales, who returned to the Easter service for the first time since 2023. She was accompanied by Prince William and their 3 children. If you want to understand royal optics, study that moment. The Wales family walked into that service and the message was unmistakable. The words healthy, united, and ready might as well have been embroidered on their coats. Kate's return carried tremendous symbolic weight. After the illness, after the rumors, after the months of speculation, the family that will define the next chapter of British monarchy stood together in public and said everything that needed to be said without uttering a single word. And who was standing near them? Prince Edward, Duke of Edinburgh, alongside his son James, Earl of Wessex, standing with Princess Anne and her husband, Sir Timothy Lawrence, standing with Peter Phillips and his daughters. He was not standing beside Camilla's inner circle. He was not positioned near her allies. He was standing in proximity to William's future, at an event that functioned in the subtle grammar of royal appearances as a preview of what the next reign might look like. Now ask yourself, where was Camilla's network? Where were her most prominent allies? Scattered, absent. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, had been expected to attend but did not appear, reportedly unwell at the last minute. You might shrug and say that's simply a cold, and maybe it was. But in royal circles, and this cannot be overstated, every absence is a deliberate decision. The logistics of royal attendance are planned weeks or months in advance. Last-minute changes do not happen by accident. They happen by design. Together, these patterns are painting a portrait of a family quietly reorganizing itself around its next chapter. Edward is choosing, visibly, deliberately, through every engagement he attends and every engagement he does not, to align himself more closely with William's future than with Camilla's present. The future king doesn't need to block anyone overtly. He doesn't need dramatic confrontations or public ultimatums. He simply needs the right people in the frame when the cameras turn on. Right now, those people look far more like Edward and Anne than they do like the Queen Consort's circle. The Andrew crisis and how it handed Edward the keys. To truly understand Edward's rising influence, you need to understand what Andrew's downfall did to the power structure of this family. Because Andrew's exile didn't just remove one problematic royal from the board, it fundamentally elevated another. Andrew, 66 years old and deeply disgraced, was evicted from his long-term residence, the Grade II listed Georgian Mansion Royal Lodge in Windsor, where he had lived with his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson since 2004. Following this eviction, he was moved to Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate. In October 2024, King Charles stripped him of his titles and forced him into this new, considerably less prestigious living arrangement. The ripple effects were immediate and personal for Edward. The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh had planned to stay at Wood Farm over Easter, a family tradition, a familiar holiday rhythm, but had to change their plans entirely because of Andrew's residency complications. Edward's family holiday traditions, built over years, were disrupted because of his disgraced brother's inability or unwillingness to move on. Now pause there for a moment, because this is where Edward's character and his political sophistication becomes most apparent. A lesser royal, a more publicity-hungry royal, a more emotionally reactive royal, would have leaked that frustration to the press. The tabloids would have paid well for it. Duke of Edinburgh's Christmas plans ruined by Andrew's selfishness. You can practically write the headline yourself. It would have been devastating for Andrew and enormously sympathetic for Edward. But Edward said nothing. He did not position himself as a victim. He did not weaponize his brother's disgrace for personal gain. He did not grant anonymous interviews to express his disappointment. Instead, he acted. It was reported that Prince Edward was the first family member to visit Andrew following his February arrest on suspicion of misconduct in a public office. While King Charles, even though he was just a mile away at Sandringham, refused to see his disgraced brother, Edward went, not to defend Andrew, not to publicly declare family solidarity, but to have a direct, private conversation encouraging Andrew to expedite his departure from Wood Farm, to make it clear that Andrew was dragging his heels and that the family needed resolution, not further chaos. Think about what this reveals about Edward's approach to power. He is not performing concern. He is managing it. He is working from inside the mess, using proximity and personal relationship as a tool, achieving outcomes that benefit the family and the institution, without ever putting himself in a headline. This is not the behavior of a man who stumbled into influence. This is the behavior of someone who has spent 60 years watching how power actually works in this institution, and is now, quietly, deploying everything he has learned. There is one more piece to this section that deserves attention. When King Charles issued his honors list in April 2024, the notable honorees included Queen Camilla, Prince William, and Princess Catherine. The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh were notably, conspicuously excluded, despite having taken on substantial additional public duties following the king's cancer diagnosis. Despite doing considerably more, they received considerably less. They continued working anyway. If Camilla's supporters, or whoever was responsible for that omission, believed that excluding Edward from the honors list would sideline him, dampen his momentum, or signal to the public that his work was less valued, they made a serious miscalculation. Public goodwill, as it turns out, cannot be withheld by a palace memo. You earn it by showing up, and Edward has been showing up. The numbers don't lie, and Camilla's are alarming. Let's talk about the polling data in detail. Because in a constitutional monarchy, popularity is not merely personal, it is profoundly political. YouGov's numbers tell a story that should be read carefully by everyone currently operating within the palace's inner circles. Queen Camilla's favorability now stands at just 42%, the lowest recorded figure since March 2021. The proportion of Britons with an unfavorable view of her has risen 4 points to 45%. This means, statistically and unambiguously, that more people in Britain currently dislike the Queen than like her. For context, King Charles maintains roughly 60% positive opinion, approximately double the 31% who view him unfavorably. The King, despite his age, despite his health challenges, despite the complications of his ascent to the throne, remains broadly popular. And then there is Edward. Roughly 50 to 51% of Britons view him and Sophie positively, with only 19 and 12% respectively viewing them negatively. His net favorability is not just better than Camilla's, it is dramatically, historically better. In a monarchy that depends on public trust and goodwill to maintain its relevance, legitimacy, and, yes, its funding, these numbers matter enormously. They determine who gets invited to represent the crown on overseas visits. They determine who stands at the front of balcony photographs. They determine, in the long run, whose influence within the institution grows and whose contracts. Consider what happened at the Commonwealth Day service. Princess Anne attended, striking in red. Prince William attended, without Kate, who had a private appointment. And what was the outcome? The appearance of unity fractured visibly at an event designed to project exactly that unity. This keeps happening at Easter, at Commonwealth Day, at routine engagements throughout the year. The unified front that palace communications work so hard to manufacture keeps breaking down, and every fracture tells its own story about where the true fault lines in this family currently run. Camilla entered the royal family as an outsider. She fought for decades to gain acceptance, navigating hostility from the public, from Diana's legacy, from sections of the press, and, most painfully, from members of the family itself. She succeeded. She was crowned. She stands at Charles's side as queen consort, and that achievement is real and hard-won and cannot be taken away from her. But the ground beneath her is shifting, not because of Harry's memoir, which has largely exhausted its ability to generate genuine damage, not because of Andrew, whose reputation has been comprehensively destroyed in ways that no longer surprise anyone, but because of the quiet, reliable, unflashy youngest brother who spent 60 years in the background and is now, methodically, step by step, reshaping the foreground. Sophie's strategic dance, the co-pilot who knows exactly where they're going. To understand Edward's strategy fully, you cannot look at Edward alone. You have to watch Sophie. In the royal family, as in most families if we're honest, spouses are not passive participants. They are co-pilots. They absorb the shocks their partners cannot publicly absorb. They attend the events their partners cannot attend. They build the relationships their partners need but cannot cultivate openly. And sometimes, their absences communicate what their presence cannot. Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, has been navigating a remarkably intentional course through the past 18 months. She was expected to attend the Easter service in 2026. Royal editor Rebecca English reported that she was under the weather at the last minute and did not appear. Her last confirmed public appearance had been on March 23rd at the Reasons for Hope Gala, which honored Dr. Jane Goodall's extraordinary legacy. A beautiful, meaningful event, a very Sophie choice of occasion. One absence due to illness might mean nothing, but set it alongside another notable pattern. Sophie and Edward were both absent from the Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey just weeks earlier. Two absences from two high-profile events where Camilla's presence was central and prominent. Royal analysts are not prepared to call these coincidences. Here is what makes Sophie particularly fascinating to observe. When she does appear in public, she is flawless. At the Commonwealth Day service, she wore a coat and matching dress by Susanna London, complemented by a Jane Taylor hat and a Sophie Habsburg clutch bag. She is impeccably dressed, professionally warm, and, this is the key word, strategically positioned. She is not retreating from royal duties. She is being exquisitely selective about which royal duties to perform. The narrative that Sophie and Edward are building together aligns more clearly with the future monarchy, the Wales-centered, post-Charles era, than with the current establishment associated with Camilla. Their relationship is not merely personal at this point, it is operational. Their absences are as coordinated as their appearances, and both are being deployed with the precision of people who understand exactly what they are doing. In palace politics, presence matters enormously, but absence, deliberate, perfectly timed absence, can carry even more weight. Sophie's choice to distance herself from Camilla's orbit is not accidental. It is a symbolic statement delivered through scheduling and public engagement, written in the language that the royal family has always used most fluently. Silence and timing, the Queen's son, and why Elizabeth's legacy runs through Edward. There is one dimension to this story that almost never gets the attention it deserves, and it may be the most important dimension of all. Prince Edward is Queen Elizabeth II's youngest child. He grew up watching his mother manage one of the most complex, scrutinized, and politically loaded institutions on the planet, and she did it for 70 years with a composure that was never passivity. It was strategy. Every smile was calibrated. Every absence was considered. Every public gesture was the product of a mind that understood, better than anyone alive, that the crown is not just a symbol, it is a living, breathing political instrument that must be wielded with extraordinary care. Edward watched all of that, up close, for decades. And what is striking, when you look carefully at his behavior now, is how much it echoes hers. Queen Elizabeth never picked public fights. She never granted revenge interviews. She never used a state occasion to humiliate a family member she disagreed with. She managed conflict from within, through private conversation, through strategic positioning, through the careful deployment of presence and absence at moments that mattered. She understood that the louder you shout in royal politics, the more credibility you sacrifice. The quieter you remain, the more power you accumulate. Edward is doing exactly this. Think about the specific moments when he could have been loud, when he and Sophie were excluded from the honors list despite taking on additional duties following Charles's cancer diagnosis. That was a slight that most people in public life would not have absorbed in silence. The tabloids would have lapped up a well-placed anonymous quote, a friend of the Duke speaking to a royal correspondent. Nothing formal, nothing attributable, just enough to remind the palace that the slight had been noticed and that there would be a price for it. Edward said nothing. When his Easter holiday plans were disrupted by Andrew's inability to vacate Wood Farm, when a tradition he had maintained for years was unceremoniously overturned because of his disgraced brother's situation, he absorbed it. He reorganized. He showed up at the Easter service anyway, standing in exactly the right position, next to exactly the right people, delivering exactly the right visual message without a single word. This is his mother's playbook, refined, updated, applied to a completely different set of circumstances but built on the same foundational understanding. In an institution where everything is theater, the most powerful actor is the one who never appears to be acting. There is also something specifically important about the title he now carries, the Duke of Edinburgh. His father's title. Prince Philip held that title from 1947 until his death in 2021, 74 years. It is the title of the loyal, essential, behind-the-scenes royal, the one who supports the sovereign without seeking to overshadow them, the one who does the work that doesn't make front pages. Philip played that role with a complexity that history is still unpacking. Edward, inheriting not just the title but the role it implies, appears to have also inherited something of his father's instinct for institutional survival. Philip navigated decades of royal politics, royal crises, and royal transitions by remaining fundamentally indispensable. He was never the story, but he was always in the room where the story was written. Edward is positioning himself in precisely the same way, not as a rival to William, not as a threat to the institution, as the steady, trustworthy, scandal-free presence that every future king will need in his corner, the one who was there before the crown landed, and who will still be there long after the coronation photographers have packed up and gone home. His mother would recognize this. She might even approve. The long game. Who is in the front row when Charles is gone? We have covered the brooch symbolism and the favorability ratings. We have covered the Easter choreography and Andrew's controversial spiral. We have covered Sophie's calculated absences and Edward's quiet loyalty. All of it, every piece of this complex, multi-layered puzzle points to one single enormous question. What will the Windsor family look like when King Charles is no longer on the throne? Here is what the polling tells us about the institution itself. Nearly 6 in 10 Britons view both the royal family and the monarchy favorably. Half of the public believes the monarchy offers good value for money. Nearly half express pride in it. The institution, YouGov suggests, will endure. It has endured for 1,000 years through civil wars, revolutions, abdications, and scandals that would have destroyed any other family. It will survive the current moment too. But the personalities that define it, the faces on the balcony, the names in the newspapers, the family at the center of the frame, those are subject to change. They are always subject to change. Camilla's role as queen consort was a hard-won achievement developed over decades of perseverance, but it is, in essence, a temporary position. When William ascends to the throne, Catherine will become queen consort. Camilla will step back. The question of what role she plays in that new arrangement, whether she remains a figure of genuine influence and warmth within the family, or becomes a relic of a previous era quietly edged toward the margins, will be decided in the years before that transition, not after. Every royal who is paying attention understands this, and Edward is very clearly paying attention. His strategy, marked by quiet loyalty, devoted service, measured distance from Camilla's declining public standing, and a careful alignment with William's emerging circle, reflects a long-term calculation that is difficult to fault. In 2025, he represented the King and the United Kingdom government on multiple overseas trips, cultivating international credibility and institutional trust that exists entirely independently of any single monarch's favor. He is building something that will outlast the current arrangement. When William's coronation takes place, and it will, the royals in the front rows will be those who recognized early which way the wind was blowing. They will be the ones who served the crown without chaining themselves to any individual's agenda within it, who built records of service, public goodwill, and institutional trust through years of unglamorous, underpublicized, entirely necessary work. The current evidence strongly suggests that Edward has made that choice, quietly, deliberately, without a press conference, without a memoir, without a single anonymous briefing to a tabloid journalist. His strategy is disarmingly simple. He shows up, he does the work, he avoids the flashy brooches of political theater, he allows his presence and his carefully calibrated absences to communicate everything that his words never need to say. What this all means, the bloodless coup nobody is talking about. Let's put all of it together, because individually, these pieces might seem circumstantial. Together, they form a pattern that is unmistakable. A brooch worn as a symbol of royal authority, pinned to the chest of a queen whose favorability numbers are falling. A quiet duke who spent 60 years being overlooked, now posting better approval ratings than the Queen of England. A future king whose circle is visibly, observably gravitating toward Edward and Anne rather than Camilla's allies. strategic absences at high-profile events, overseas diplomatic missions that build independent credibility, a disgraced brother visited privately and managed carefully, an honors list exclusion absorbed without complaint and worked around with continued service. None of this is an accident. None of this is coincidence. None of this is the passive behavior of a man who simply happens to be in the right place at the right time. This is the most understated conflict within the British monarchy right now. It is not the drama surrounding Harry versus the firm. That story, for all its tabloid oxygen, has largely settled into a predictable pattern. It is not the wreckage of Andrew's reputation. That story is essentially over. It is the slow, bloodless, entirely polite repositioning occurring at the very center of the institution, reflected in seating arrangements, scheduling decisions, and the subtle grammar of royal jewelry. Prince Edward has spent 60 years in the background. He may spend the next decade reshaping the foreground. And Camilla, who fought for everything she has with a tenacity that deserves genuine admiration, may find that the most effective threat she ever faced was not the tabloids, not Diana's ghost, not Harry's pen, but the quiet, reliable, endlessly patient man who was always standing just at the edge of the frame. Now here is what I want to know from you. Do you think Edward is playing a deliberate long game? Or is this being read into what are simply the normal rhythms of royal family life? Do you believe Camilla's favorability ratings represent a genuine shift in how the British public views the monarchy's future? And when William eventually ascends to the throne, who do you think will be standing beside him in those front rows? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one of them. And one more question before you go. If Prince Edward truly is the most underestimated power player in the Windsor family right now, what does that tell us about the way we consume royal coverage? What else are we missing because we're too focused on the loud voices, the dramatic exits, and the jewel-encrusted statements, while the real power quietly repositions itself just out of frame? Think about it, and share this video with someone who still thinks Edward is the royal the tabloids can afford to ignore, because those days, if this analysis is correct, are over. The most powerful moves in the royal family have never been made loudly. They have been made carefully, patiently, and with the precision of someone who understands that in an institution built on tradition, symbolism, and the long view, the person who controls their narrative controls their future. Prince Edward is controlling his narrative. He is doing it without a publicist, without a memoir, without a dramatic resignation letter. He is doing it the old way, the royal way, through presence, service, loyalty, and the perfectly placed absence. Whether you believe Camilla saw this coming or not, one thing is certain: the royal family is reorganizing. The alliances are shifting. The favorability numbers are moving in directions that matter politically and institutionally. And when William eventually stands at the altar for his own coronation, the story of who stood closest to him and who was left outside the frame will have been written by decisions being made right now, in 2026, in ways most of us are only beginning to understand. If I'm wrong, tell me why in the comments. I genuinely want the conversation. If this opened your eyes to something you hadn't considered, hit the like button and share it, because this story deserves more attention than it's getting. Subscribe if you want to keep following this narrative as it develops, because it is far from over. I'll see you in the next one.